Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded April 16th, 2015. Episode 252, NAB 2015. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week's guest geek is Mike Heiss, an industry consultant, journalist, analyst, and all-around good fellow.
Thank you.
To talk about what we both saw and heard at NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters Conference, which we just got back from. Hey, Mike, did you have safe travels back?
Yeah, well, except for, as we just said, all flight attendants, please stay seated for the duration of the flight. But it was like testing out, a D-box in the air.
Yes, I can definitely understand that. You left on Tuesday when the huge windstorm came through Vegas. I left on Wednesday, and it was still kind of windy, but nothing like that. In fact, let me start by showing a photo of the windstorm. I actually took a picture of the dust that accumulated around Vegas. It looked like thick fog. It was amazing. If Bert can call that up, it's the one I just sent in the last minute. And since we're talking about it, I will mention it here. And here it is.
Whoa!
That is looking out of the convention center. And it looks like a super thick, foggy day, but that's dust being kicked up by super high winds.
That looks like L.A. late night and early morning fog.
I know. It was astonishing.
Wow.
And as soon as I walked out of the convention center, I was like hit in the face with 50-mile-an-hour winds. It was unbelievable.
Crickets.
Unbelievable. Anyway, that was just one part of the excitement at NAB. There was plenty more, and we're going to talk about it right here. Those of you who are in the chat room at irc.twit.tv, which you can reach by going to live.twit.tv if you're watching the live stream, you can post questions for us as we go, and I'll pass along as many as I can. So I think the first thing that was pretty obvious at the National Association of Broadcasters, NAB convention this year, was that 4K was everywhere. I mean, it was completely ubiquitous. And virtually all the pieces are now in place. Not 100%, but I don't know, 90%? What do you think, Mike?
And those that aren't are well on the way. That's where I'd put ATSC 3.0 sort of in that it's not baked yet, but it's in the oven and it's well along.
Exactly. And the same with the high dynamic range, HDR.
For sure. And the one thing I would add to that is anybody who went to NAB 3 or 4 years ago would say, well, they said that about 3D 3 or 4 years ago, and look what happened. But they're not kidding about this one. This is really for real.
Yeah, it really is for real. In fact, you're right. I've heard more than one person say, oh, 4K, it's just going to be like 3D. It's going to come and go. No. That ain't...
And conversely, 8K is coming, but I don't think the world at large will go to that just because of the expense and where does the value proposition end for the average viewer of point of diminishing returns.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, NHK was there at the show, as they've been for a number of years, showing 8K and, on a big giant screen and so on. You saw that demo. I didn't.
I did, and it looked really good. They did a documentary about some of the people that were displaced from Fukushima after the earthquake and the Tokyo Electric reactor issue.
Right,
and
the tsunami,
yeah, and they were showing, and it was kind of sad actually, because they were showing these empty, deserted streets with beautiful cherry blossoms, and the color was great, although not HDR, because they had the cinematographer there, and somebody asked them. The color was great, the resolution was great. And I was sitting in literally the last row. And then they showed a documentary about a famous Japanese botanist who was doing those very classical kind of Japanese fine line drawings of plants. And it was like a resolution chart, and it was as crisp as could be. And I must have been 40, 50, 60 feet from the screen.
But that screen was probably 30 or 40 feet wide, right? I mean, it was a big screen.
I think it was a 250 or 300-inch screen.
Okay.
With an 8K rear projection.
Native 8K. Last year, it was basically 8K, what we call sometimes E-shift, which is 4K right, jumping back and forth to sort of pseudo 8K. But this was true 8K?
Apparently, and around the booth, they had a bunch of 85-inch LCDs that were native, all made by Sharp. But I think, not to get distracted to 8K, but the advancements there were 2 or 3 years ago, the cameras were huge and had, 24 SDI fiber links coming out of the back. The cameras that they were showing this year, made by Ikegami, were, if I didn't tell you it was an HK camera, you'd think it was a typical ENG, HD or 4K camera. So they've come down in size. They have not come down in price.
But
and the lenses are hugely expensive.
Hugely expensive, yes. Well, we're going to talk about lenses a little bit later, because that is kind of an important thing with regard to 4K. But where I'd really like to start is with high dynamic range. We talked about that a little before the show started. We've mentioned it a couple times here. But to me, that was the big story of the show, because anyone who's watched this show for any length of time or read my stuff online knows that I believe that increasing the number of pixels from 2.2 million to 8.8 million in the case of 4K is not nearly as important as increasing the dynamic range, the difference between black and white in a display, and also in the capture process. Can the camera capture a wider dynamic range? And then if so, can the display it properly? And will it stay that way throughout the whole production workflow, as they say? And we saw a number of professional monitors now with true high dynamic range capability, as well as a couple of consumer sets, which is very, very interesting. Mike, did you spend much time looking at high dynamic range?
Yes, it did. And I did see the Vizios that were showing Dolby Vision over in the Dolby booth.
Right.
Sony had 2, they called them prototypes, but you do the math, sets in their booth. I guess Bravias that are clearly going to be an indication of what might be coming down the line later this year with high dynamic range. And then in sort of a little black tunnel behind the booth, they had not only a demonstration of someone actually grading a raw image out to both SD and HD, but Sony not only has a production monitor now that is HDR, but it's also the first monitor, yeah, there it is, with Rec 2020 in a monitor. Yeah. So that was pretty significant. And I think that's called the X300. Tad expensive for home use, but the images were really good.
I agree. And what they were showing there, what we didn't see in that photo, was they had 2 X300s next to each other. And these are OLED monitors. I don't remember if you mentioned that or not. They're 4K resolution OLED monitors, 1,000 nits peak brightness, which today content is graded for a peak brightness of 100 nits.
Yeah, I mean, that's sunglasses territory.
Well, yes, and a lot of people complain and they say, well, if I have a monitor that's capable of 1,000 nits, or in the case of the Dolby one, 4,000 nits, I'm going to need sunglasses. I'm going to get eye strain. I'm going to get retina burn. And I don't think that's really the case, because they're not using that 1,000 nits to blast the entire picture. They're using it for little, what are called specular highlights. And
they didn't want things to bloom.
Yes, they don't want things to.
And that's the trick, is that the fellow that was doing the grading, the knob twisting, it's up to the people who do that. It's their skill to properly interpret it out into the monitors for whatever the HDR system is.
Exactly, exactly. And another point to make about this is that if you have a peak brightness, if you're mastering, as that guy, the knob twiddler, was doing, to 100 nits, then by the time you get there, if you're showing a really bright image and it's got some color in it, if you get there and go even a little bit beyond, that color disappears and all you have is white. And so another reason to have a much higher brightness in your monitor is so that you can retain color fidelity at those higher brightnesses. So these are a couple of reasons why it's really important.
And the Dolby demos have really been good at showing that. The one that they showed at the SMPTE, I don't think I saw it at the NAB this year, is the one where they've got an old P-38, but really aluminum buffed to the max, flying over the ocean, and you can really see the difference.
Oh yeah, they were showing that at NAB in their little production booth off to the side of their main booth. And that display, again, is 4,000 nits peak bright. And it also goes to 2020. Wait, am I correct about that?
I don't know if
no,
the Dolby
P3.
one does 2020.
No, it does not. It goes to P3, which is the
Cinema Standard.
Cinema Standard. Thank you. Cinema Standard. But it does have 12-bit resolution, 12-bit bit depth, which most of the rest of these monitors have a 10-bit resolution. So Dolby has a little bit of an advantage there. They were also showing a new monitor that they have, which goes to 2,000 nits of peak brightness, also P3. And the really interesting thing about that one is that the original one is LED LCD TV with full array local dimming, and every single LED, separate LED behind the screen is independently dimmable, unlike most what are called full array local dimming, where you have zones, groups of LEDs that are dimmed and brightened. In this case, each LED is dimmed and brightened separately. Same thing with the newer monitor, the 2,000 nit monitor, except that it doesn't use white LEDs. It uses quantum dots. In a sheet, in a film, in front of an array of blue LEDs. So they actually get a wider color gamut on that device. And they were showing that next to standard dynamic range as well. And both of them just looked fantastic, really amazing.
Well, the ultimate in that, in LED displays, is there was one in the South Hall down in the back in the lower level that was an 8K LED, like a large venue or stadium display. And
I missed that.
You didn't want to stand up close to it, but it's designed for, like the new scoreboard at Dodger Stadium or what have you.
Right.
And it was 8K, 24-bit color. And you had to stand quite a distance back, but it was really bright and for what it was, really good. So this is going at all ends of the stick.
It is. It is. Did you get into the Canon booth to see their high dynamic range?
Yes, I did, and they have their own. They've had their own monitor, mostly again for the production and a photography community for some time, and that also looked really good. Although Canon's take on this is that's as much for print production as anything else, because the one thing that the studio suits really hate about digital cinema is the word that's been eliminated from the director's lexicon is cut, because you're not chewing up. You're not chewing up film, even though you are continually using storage space, but they just keep the cameras, if you will, rolling, because even though a take might not be good for the final cut, there may be something they could use in print advertising or in a poster or what have you, or an online. So they keep those images using terabytes and petabytes and schmetabytes of storage. But then the Canon people recommend using this monitor on which to view an image and pull the stills, and then print it out on their really good printers.
Well, I hadn't heard that, but I did know that they have some production monitors, some on-set monitors that have some high dynamic range capability. The latest one that they just introduced at the show goes up to 400 nits, which is certainly 4 times better than 100. But it doesn't come close to what some of these other displays are doing. The they had a prototype also in one of their totally darked out rooms, and they had another color grading system like the one we saw that picture of at Sony.
Yeah.
And this monitor in there, look, that probably was my favorite high dynamic range image at the show. It was 2,000 nits. It goes out to, let's see. Ooh, they didn't say. I didn't learn what the color gamut is, and they didn't reveal what
Canon.
Canon, yeah. But
and that was in a dark room. One Joe Whipp is asking that. That was in a very dark room.
Yes, exactly. And what was so cool about that one was the footage that they had shot with the Canon C300 Mark II, which I believe is a DSLR.
Or equivalent, yeah.
Or equivalent. Anyway, they shot some footage of inside of a dim bar, right? So there's a pool table and there's some people in this dim, low light bar. And there's a window out that looks out to the outside world, and it's very bright out there. Now, if you saw that on any television show today, you would, or a movie even, you would see they probably expose it for the details inside the bar, and the window itself would just look like this totally blown out white thing that you couldn't see anything outside. But you could, on this image, you could see everything outside in perfect detail in the high end, as well as all the details in the low end inside the bar. It was amazing.
I didn't see that one. I did see the other Canon, and it really, really did look good. That's clearly where this is going, and I think this might even be worth inserting that one of the Dolby Prime Cinema first releases that they're going to show will be in a theatrical version of Dolby Vision for some Disney movie.
Yes,
in the
exactly right. Yep, in the theaters. And they're installing, now this is going to be commercial cinema high dynamic range, and they're using projectors based on Christie projectors. And I'm still waiting to learn exactly how they're doing high dynamic range in the cinema, because that's a neat trick. And they're going to do it, I'm sure.
The press release just said Dolby Vision.
I know. It's going to be high dynamic range, but I don't yet know how they're doing it with a digital cinema projector. That's a neat trick. I think I put up, did I put in any photos of any other high dynamic range? Well, there's the Christie laser projector. I was going to talk about that later, but that's all right.
And I think that's what they're using in the Dolby cinemas.
Right, exactly. Two of them probably. Yeah, I do have two pictures of the Sony BVM X300, which we should be able to see, and that's sort of a side-by-side. And this brings up a tricky problem for us journalists. Here, that's the consumer. That's the side-by-side with the consumer displays. There's the BVM X300. These are OLED monitors. And as you can see, it's labeled SDR, standard dynamic range, on the left, and high dynamic range on the right. You know, it's impossible. It's literally impossible to take photos of a high dynamic range display unless you have a high dynamic range camera, which I don't. So
and squeeze it through Skype and all of that. So
exactly, and then display it on a computer monitor that isn't high dynamic range. It's basically impossible to do. So
folks,
I just took this.
Trust us, it was really good.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I sort of took these pictures only to say, see, I was there. And the other one, the Sony Consumer HDR, was the other really nice demo that you mentioned, where they had an X850B on the left, which is their current not top of the line, but relatively high end UHD 4K TV. And on the right is a prototype of a high dynamic range Bravia, which I suspect we'll see at CES 2016. I bet you that'll be a product by then, if not sooner. And they said that had 1,000 nits of peak brightness. And so, you know, that is to me really exciting stuff. Oh, did you see the JVC demo? Let me just show the picture of that real quick. JVC had a high dynamic range monitor, which was a rear projection DILA. It's using their projection technology. And they had an interesting, here's a high dynamic range capable camera shooting a scene of a flute and something on a table with a red tablecloth in front of the Johnny's Pizza door. And then that's on to the right. And then on to the left, you can see this rear projector TV.
I know, that was a scream.
I thought, didn't think I'd ever see a rear projector TV ever again, but there it was, just to demonstrate. It was a technology concept demo of high dynamic range and how they could do it with DILA, with this imaging technology that's in their projectors.
Well, remember, the JVC Kenwood really isn't in the display business anymore. They sold that off. They've licensed the name off to a company that his name escapes me. So I guess that was the easiest way for them to do it. But what's also important is the camera was specifically designed to capture the images in HDR. And that was, I think, another big part of the show was what they're doing with sensors and cameras and all that line.
That's exactly right. And that was the next point I wanted to bring up and talk about, were the digital cameras, digital cinema cameras and so on, many of which can now capture 14 stops of dynamic range or more.
And that JVC one can.
It can.
Yes, that's the SMPTE standard. I think ST2086.
Okay, right. ST2084 is the high dynamic range display, and the 2086 then must be the capture side of things.
Yes, yes.
And 14 stops, just in case anybody needs to do the math, is greater than 16,000 to 1 contrast ratio. Now, in the commercial cinema, we're talking the typical contrast ratio is 100 to 1. In a home theater display these days, we're lucky, we're happy if it gets really over a couple thousand to 1. And this is huge. This is huge. And the cameras that I saw there that did it, there were quite a few. That JVC was one. The ARRI Alexa 65, which actually has an image sensor the size of a 65 millimeter film frame, even a little bigger than that. It can go 14 stops. The Panasonic VariCam 35. I have a picture of
F65, I'm sure can.
Yes, the Sony F65 and F55 and F5 can all do that as well.
Oh, and don't forget the Dragons.
I was about to say, I got a picture of the Dragons from Red Digital Cinema. So it's got, the picture's called Red. There it is. There's a couple of them there. And Red's got a strange sense of humor. A lot of these companies put together these sets, and then they put up their cameras and let people come by and, you know, fiddle with them and zoom them and pan them around and stuff. And in most cases, it's, you know, some pretty girl sitting at a table or doing hula hoops, as in the case of JVC. But at Red's booth, they had this weird macabre, I don't know what you would call it, autopsy room, torture chamber, where they were showing these Red digital cameras, and they looked phenomenal.
The static displays were like they were in jail.
Yeah, yeah, unbelievable.
But they were also claiming, what was it? 5K motion, 8K still, and 19 megapixels.
19 megapixel stills.
Yeah.
4K, I think, live, and 6K cinema, something like that.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, something along those lines. And they are claiming 16 stops of dynamic range. The Black Magic also has several cameras that can do it. The Ursa is one of them, and I took a picture of that, looking at a much nicer set. Actually, a sort of a jazz trio, I think, getting ready to play. But again, and that camera, that's the Ursa. I forget specifically which one, but it's I think it's well under $10,000.
Oh, it's I think it's only about 5,000. I was really shocked to see that. But X the lens.
Yeah, yeah. You put a lens on it, you're going to be talking a little bit more money,
or maybe a lot more money,
or probably a lot more money. So anyway, I just wanted to show that yes, cameras can now capture that high dynamic range. We are now starting to see displays that can display that high dynamic range, both in the professional realm and in the consumer realm. By the way, in the ARRI booth, they were showing high dynamic range content shot on the Alexa 65 and the Amira 4K cameras on a Samsung JS 9500, a 65-inch JS 9500 SUHD TV, which is now available. So high dynamic range sets are, in fact, in the marketplace.
And for the film folks out there, I think it's appropriate to say that the imager size for what they call the Cine 4K cameras, the Vericams, the X65s, the Reds, and that sort of product are Super 35 size.
Right.
And that's the reason for the big, huge, expensive lenses.
Exactly. Only one other thing to say about displays before we go to the lenses, because I want to go to that. This was something that you thought was really important, and I kind of I kind of missed it because I was focused on other things. But in addition to, and we mentioned it before, in addition to high dynamic range, we're now getting TVs with wide color gamut. I mentioned P3, which is the commercial cinema gamut, but there were a couple of displays there with actual Rec 2020 color gamut capability.
But not consumer.
Not consumer, no. The Christie laser projector, which we saw a picture of a moment ago, and we could take a look at that again. That has true 2020 capability. I don't know if you watched their demo. I happened to go by.
I didn't see.
They actually switched between 2020 P3 and 709, the current color gamut that we use today.
Oh, I saw that at HPA. It was not subtle. The difference was really obvious. Exactly.
And so, boy, oh boy, when we start shooting in 2020 and projecting in 2020, it really does look great. I asked several people about the problem, one of the problems with Rec 2020, which is called metameric failure. Ooh.
That's not covered by my health plan. I can't.
I know, nor mine, I'm afraid. But it happens when you have red, green, and blue primaries that have very narrow bandwidth, which is what you get with a laser. So it's easy to reproduce with a laser, but when you do that, two people looking at the same image can potentially see different colors. And so there are those of us, for example, Joe Kane, who would like to see us standardize on what's called the P3 gamut I mentioned before. It's what's currently used in digital cinema. It's wider. It encompasses more colors than 709, than HD TV, but it doesn't go out as far as 2020, and it doesn't result in this metameric failure.
And there's an inside baseball in there that with HDR, you can send an SDR image and then send the metadata so that the sets that are HDR capable can deal with it and the ones that aren't don't have to be bothered. But with 2020, you can't do that. And I understand that there are problems that a 2020 image doesn't play well on a 709 set. And they're trying to figure out how to deal with that. But that's still an issue.
Right, exactly. So, okay, wide color gamut, we talked about that. So then let's get then to what you were talking about in terms of the big enabling factor for, let's talk about live or broadcast Ultra HD, which is another huge topic. We heard some news about ATSC 3.0. Currently, HD TV is broadcast over a standard called ATSC 1.0. I have no idea what happened to 2.0, but
it's nominal improvements.
Okay,
it's not like MPEG. It's not like MPEG 3, which they kind of glossed. Though they went from MPEG 2 to MPEG 4, or MP3 to MP4. There is an ATSC 2.0, but it's not as disruptive as 3.0 will be.
Okay. Nevertheless, we're now coming up on ATSC 3.0, which will convey Ultra HD or 4Ks, as some people call it, with potentially high dynamic range, immersive audio, all the stuff that we're looking forward to in terms of UHD. Give us an update on where we are with ATSC 3.0.
I think they're about 2/3 of the way through it. And a couple of the people I spoke to from Zenith Labs, which is owned by LG, as LG bought the Zenith name many years ago, but I think they still call the lab Zenith Labs so they can keep the trademark active. And those folks said their going to sort of do it in pieces. The physical layer, the transport stream, the heavy inner lifting is pretty much done. And one of the things they're going to do, which I think is really cool, they found the Zenith Labs people, in talking to TV stations, found an unused channel left over from the SD to HD digital transition with a 600 kilowatt transmitter, mothballed and not on the air in Cleveland. So they reached out to Tribune, who owns it, and they're going to bring this back up so that instead of having to do their testing like from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m., because stations are on the air 24 hours almost now, they're going to bring this 600 kilowatt station back up and test all of these things. So they're pretty far along. They did some impressive demonstrations of what's called A-WARN, which is like the, if this were an actual emergency, you'd be dead now notification system. But with modern graphics, and they showed how it could be used for Amber Alerts and hurricane warnings and things other than, kind of nuclear holocaust. And that's a really key thing because that system hasn't been updated in years. But they will test it. The only thing, or one of the few things that's still open, is the audio standard. And there are now, they started with 3, they're down to 2, and they are still testing to see which one. Bottom line, it'll probably be mostly available sometime in 2016, but how the transition is going to happen, they're not so sure about yet.
Exactly. We talked about that at the CEA dinner we both attended on Sunday. And, are they going to run 2 channels in parallel like they did between this analog and digital? Not this time. So how they're going to do it? The channels have all gone away. They've gone into the repack, and the government is auctioning them off to the cellular providers. That's right. That's right. So how that transition is going to occur is still quite up in the air, I would say. Now, and no $40 coupons this time. And no $40 coupons for converter boxes this time either. LG, what you said, was demonstrating sending ATSC 3.0 signals through a normal 6 megahertz channel, which is what we have for broadcast. So it is obviously possible to do. And, could be, as you say, could be perfectly finally baked by 2016. We shall see. Oh, it's now down to the details. They've got the general scheme of it, but now it's the I want mine, you want yours. And some of this is also, quite frankly, patent royalty driven. The guy who gets the thing they choose gets the patent royalties. Right, exactly. W8SS Joe here in the chat room is just an accuracy thing. F1 to F90 is 14 stops. F90, holy smokes. I don't think I've ever seen a camera with that. Mark 7, the question for me is how close are SUHD sets to Rec 2020? And the answer is they're not really. They're closer to P3, I would say. And it's funny that you see all the manufacturers expressing this as percentage of NTSC. Even the QD Vision guys always talk about percentage of NTSC, not percentage of 709 or P3. So that part, that's a display technology question. Yeah, that's true. And W8SS Joe says, in any case, it is impressive and a hell of a lot of depth of field. That's absolutely true. Okay, where was I? Where were we? Oh, I wanted to mention lenses and live TV. Right, but before we get there, and broadcast TV, right. But I just wanted to quickly mention that you saw something that I didn't, which was the 4C TV, 4TV tuner. Oh, yeah, that was cool. Which was pretty cool, and we even have a photo of it. Yeah, this is a cool little device, and I have to admit, I know we're on Twit here, I'm a little skeptical of things that are on Kickstarter coming to market, but this is called 4CTV, the number 4 SEE-TV, and it's a box with 4 ATSC over-the-air tuners. So if you're going over the top, it'll receive, as you see in the image, thanks, Burke, 4 different off-air images. The box then is controlled by an app on your smartphone or tablet and then sends these 4 images to your Chromecast or Fire TV or similar kind of device. So if you want to have a sports bar on your TV and nobody has PIP anymore,
That was pretty cool. It's $99 on Kickstarter now, and I think it's going to be 169 when available in the fall. And it's cool. I'm going to get one and test it out.
Yeah. I'd like to try that too. Okay, let's talk about lenses, because this is a really important part of the equation that especially impacts live broadcasting, like sports or concerts or award shows, stuff like that. If you have a cinema camera, you can use a cinema lens and it works just fine, but it doesn't work so well for broadcast. Why don't you elaborate there, if you would?
Sure. And in fact, as you showed on that picture of the Red and the Alexa, those are big honking lenses, and they're used in television broadcasts now. But yeah, there you go, for episodics. And they're not really designed to be quickly changed. And the nature of the optics on a Super 35 size sensor is you don't have very wide zoom ranges. The maximum you can get out of a Fujinon or Schneider or Canon cinema for digital cinema lens is maybe 12x. Well, if you've got the high mount center field camera at a football game or a hockey game or a basketball game, or the center field camera, how does the center field camera zoom in to home plate? With a really big lens, like a 90 or 100x zoom. And that type of glass, as they say, has not been available for the PL mount, the type of mount that goes on those Super 35 lenses. And even if they did, Super 35 imaging cameras, and even if they did, they'd be bizarrely expensive and huge and heavy. So
So here we have a picture. What is that picture we're looking at right now?
That is one of the Aries, I believe, and that is a Canon PL mount lens.
Okay, so that's what you would see for movies, for episodic TV, for stuff that's going to get edited later.
And also stuff where there may be a focus puller. Because of the precision that you can get with the big imagers, depth of field is also an issue. So that's where you want, in sort of true cinema production fashion, a focus puller. Well, if you're following, it's a home run, and you're following the arc of a ball, you don't have a focus puller. You can't do that. And you don't have the guy doing this with the, you'd have to show me there. You don't have the cameraman doing the zoomy thing with the twirl knob on the handles of his camera. So there are two things that are required. One is they really need the smaller sensors, the full 2/3 inch sensors, and they need the B4 mount, which is what the production guys call a box lens. Anybody who's seen a camera in a shot at a sporting event or practically anywhere else, you see this thing that looks like a big box in front of the lens. And those are those 80, 90, 110 inch zooms. That's the Sony camera with more of an ENG lens. And those nice gentlemen in the back with the guy from Sony in the front are from NEP, Game Creek, CBS Sports, NBC Sports. They'll be buying that camera to use both for field production, and I don't know if we have a picture of one of the bigger cameras with a box lens, because that's what's typically, you'd have that camera, but
I don't have that, unfortunately.
Okay, with a big box lens, like, whoops, there's the lens like you just saw.
Right.
And there's a box lens.
The big box lens. Okay, got it.
So that's a 90x zoom where the cameraman, if you will, does this. He's got a twirl knob on the handle of his camera. So the skill of the camera operator is to follow the path of the object or the player and zoom and focus all at the same time. You can't do that very well with the cinema lens. So this sounds like inside baseball, but the ability to have these kinds of cameras from Panasonic, Grass Valley, and Sony available will make remote production in 4K much more viable.
Mm. Now, another issue, you mentioned zooming and, zooming into home plate or whatever.
Right.
Another way to do that, if you're shooting in 4K, is to actually crop the image down to 1080p. You can do a 4x zoom just by doing that. Of course, the image is no longer 4K resolution, but
well, they do that for replays. And in fact, at the Grass Valley press conference, they were talking about you had a choice of 4K or 8x frame rate, because when they use the cameras for that, they'll, if you will, overcrank the frame rate so that they can slow it down and do the slow motion in 4K or in HD and SD.
Right.
That's really something that's been around for a while. But there are no real. In fact, I asked the people from NEP, who are, I believe, the largest provider of mobile vans in the world, I think, if they had a 4K, if they had a 4K truck in the U.S., and the fella said, no, we've had no call for it. We have 2 in Australia, to which I said, why? And he said, because they asked for it. There was one 4K truck on the floor in the Sony booth. I don't know if you went into it. And I asked the guys what it's used for, and they said they park it in the parking lot at Culver Studios, or at what they call a 4-wall stage, where you rent a stage to do a show without a control room. This becomes the control room. But he said nobody's had them do any 4K sports or events with it yet.
There was one other 4K truck. It was outside between the Central and South Halls, and it was mostly Grass Valley stuff. I didn't get into that one either, but that was there were 2 in 4K production trucks at the show that I knew of. That might have been
Game Creek.
Yeah, I can't remember.
But this is one of those things that it's an enabler. And in order for 4K to really be everywhere, and we went through this when we went from SD to HD. At the beginning, there were only 1 or 2 HD production trucks, and they were booked up solid. That's why it was 2 or 3 years before every Sunday football game was in HD, or every college Saturday football game was in HD, because there just weren't enough trucks. And if my son at that point was at Washington State University in beautiful Pullman, Washington, and there weren't enough trucks, their games weren't in HD because they didn't have one to send up there.
Yeah. Chip Adams, the head of NBC's coverage of the Olympics, was on this show a few weeks ago. And I asked him if the 2016 Olympics, were they going to shoot that in 4K? He said, no. There will be some.
And a lot of people were asked that, and the answer is no.
So, we're in a transition period here again, and it's going to be a while before all the pieces are in place. And that's kind of what we were being shown at NAB throughout the whole thing. Now,
but all the pieces are coming into place.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, the bottom message.
Yes, I agree. Joe Whipp made a comment a little while ago in the chat room. I wanted to make sure we got to it. Were any of the HDR demos in dark rooms? And the answer is most of them were. In fact, all the ones. Yeah, coal mines. Those that have issues with HDR are concerned that they will be way too bright to watch in a dark room. I didn't find it to be so.
Nor did I. I didn't find that at all.
Now, granted, we didn't sit down and watch a 2-hour movie in HDR. We stood there for a few minutes and watched this HDR.
I think you'd acclimate to it.
I think so too. I don't anticipate any problem with that. Of course, time will tell. When we get HDR content into an HDR set, into a home theater, and watch a 2-hour movie, we'll see. But honestly, I really don't anticipate a problem with that.
Well, I'm going to see where those Dolby cinemas are going to be. Maybe we can go and check it out there and see what HDR looks like, at least in a cinema.
Exactly. And I am told that they're going to be put into AMC Prime theaters, and one of the first is going to be here in Burbank. So you and I can absolutely go to that.
Beautiful downtown Burbank.
Beautiful downtown Burbank. No question about it. Yeah. Expert in the chat room. I'm waiting for 32K. Well, as you say, as you increase the resolution, you come to a point of diminishing returns. Some people think 4K is the point of diminishing returns, but it's here, it's coming. There's nothing we can do about it. I think 8K probably.
That's about enough.
That's more than enough, really. And Mahler
after that,
music
it's
is
just Special K.
Yeah, right. Having gotten sick before the show,
I'm sorry.
you're making me. You always make me laugh. And when I have this cough, it's really a problem. So it's all right. I can handle it.
Please, Joanna.
Yes, right. Okay, well, let's see. What else have we got to talk about here? Oh, immersive audio. Let's make sure we talk about immersive audio, certainly. As you mentioned, there have been 3 proposals for immersive audio in ATSC 3.0, the broadcast standard, and DTS recently dropped out. I actually hadn't heard that before the show, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Surprised to hear that.
Yeah,
they're
focusing a little bit more. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think we're both going to say the same thing. I apologize. That they said they were going to focus on not just immersive audio, but interactive audio outside of ATSC because it's just bloody easier than dealing with the standards nonsense. So you might see their proposal implemented in cable or satellite or streaming. They're just not going to try and get into ATSC. And they're the 2 candidates left are Dolby's AC4 and MPEG-H, both of which were at the show, and neither of which would let me into their demos.
Well, MPEG-H, I didn't get into that demo either. But the point I wanted to make about both of those is that they, like DTS-X, which is the format that that was being considered that the DTS had submitted to ATSC, all of them do what's called interactive audio as well as immersive audio. Okay, so they're all object-based. They all send objects around the room, and depending on how many speakers you have and in what orientation. But they're also all interactive and personalizable.
Yes,
which means you can goose the dialogue level, or you can
choose
the
degruntifier,
which is great. Which I think was MPEG-H. It had that little thing where they shot a tennis match, and one of the Williams sisters, I forget which one, grunts a lot when she plays, and so they actually had that on a separate object, static object in the bitstream, and you could go and you could turn that down if it
that was really great.
I thought it was hilarious. You know, or if in a race car, you can race. Say you're watching a NASCAR race, and you could listen to the cockpit mic of one of the cars if you wanted to.
Yeah. Or do you want to listen to Vince Scully or the ESPN guy? You know, those kinds of things. And it's really a compelling bit, and that's also tied into AWARN, which is the advanced the world is coming to an end system, where it'll make it easier to interrupt the programming for audio and not scare the daylights out of people.
Right, without that weird.
Oh no, but that's exactly the point, and because that's hackable.
Ah, I didn't realize that.
And they want the newscaster to be able to come on while you're continually watching your program. Attention, please, the world is about to come to an end. But we now return to our regularly scheduled program.
Enjoy it while you can.
Enjoy it while you can. Yes, indeed. Well, but you see, now wait, before it gets late, I want to get my money's worth out of my shirt. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, please.
Okay.
Yes, I remember when.
Very indulgent.
Thank you. Yes. I remember when. One thing at the NAB show is that they always have a store, where you can buy T-shirts and stuff. And Mike always comes back with the best T-shirts.
Well, I told you to buy the one that said that. In fact, I said this to the Padre. I said they had a tech guy one, and you should buy it and give it to Leo. And he said Scott should buy it because he fills in sometimes.
Yes, I should have, and I just ran out of time and didn't get a chance to do that. So too bad.
One more thing about audio, if I may.
Please.
In the NHK demo, for I think, as you said, the 3rd or 4th year in a row, they had their 22.2 system, which was lows, ear levels, and heights, or tops, or voice of gods, whatever you want to call them. And although the music was very well reproduced, I asked one of the NHK fellas, and he said that it was channel based. It was not an object based mix, and it just didn't sound as immersive as an Atmos or Oro or DTS-X. And again, it may have been the mix, but just my observation.
Yeah. I was kind of surprised to hear that it was channel based entirely. I guess I didn't really know before. I knew they were doing 22 main channels and 2 subwoofer channels, and they've demonstrated that for years, actually. But it's still a channel-based system. And
then they tried something else where they had one of those sharp 85-inch monitors with speakers around the screen, all around the boards of the screen. And granted, the noise floor in the convention center was high, but I walked back and forth to try and see if there was a sweet spot, and either the DSP wasn't good or it's a bad idea, but it didn't work.
No, I've heard that demo before, and I agree, it doesn't work. Now, Fraunhofer, in their booth, as part of their MPEG-H demo, has a similar thing. They call it the sound frame, which is basically a frame of speakers around the screen, and it simulates this immersive audio. And I think it does a pretty good job from the demos I've heard.
There's a lot of DSP behind that. That's one of the reasons. It's not. That's just not putting speakers around the screen, which I think is what NHK did. There's some heavy DSP in there.
Yeah. Agreed. So, immersive audio, we didn't learn that much that was new, except the DTS kind of dropped out of ATSC. All of the other things
are there. The mixing tools are there.
The mixing tools are there as well. Yes, exactly. In fact, I did see in the Fraunhofer booth, they had a simulation of a remote truck at some event. And then in the next room over was supposedly the network center, they'd say NBC or whatever, in New York. And then in the next room over from that, they had the local affiliate engineering section from, I think it was Birmingham, Alabama, quote unquote. Right. And then across the hall, they had the living room in Birmingham, Alabama, which was receiving the signal. Now, I did document this on the Twit Live special from NAB, which is currently on the twit.tv website. And we actually shot how from the quote unquote production truck, how that was happening. And the guy was actually mixing in dynamic objects as in real time. And you mentioned about production tools, and here was a production tool. The guy had a joystick, and he was moving the joystick around, and they were watching snowboarding, half pipe snowboarding.
Yes.
And he was taking the sound of the snowboard and kind of panning it up and down, back and forth as the guy was going down the half pipe.
Immersifying it.
Immersifying it, exactly. Now, I have to say, I was thinking to myself, and I didn't ask him at the time on the video, who is going to go to the trouble of actually doing that pan manually
in a live shoot?
In a live shoot.
No way.
I can't imagine that actually happening. So that may not have been the best example of the use of.
I asked the guys in that TV4 truck, in the 4K truck in the Sony booth about that. And they said, I asked them, since you've got a 4K truck, can you do immersive audio mixes or object-based audio mixes? And the guy said, probably not without the audio guy having a nervous breakdown. I mean, if you've got all the inputs, and if you've ever been in a live truck mix with some of your music side work, I would guess you have. If you're doing a big concert and you've got a huge fader mixing desk, the last thing you want to do is monkey around with objects. You'd need an A2 and A3. You'd need a whole bunch of assistants, and the trucks just aren't up for that yet, and the people will lose their minds.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I've been in the trucks for the Grammys. I've been in the trucks for the Oscars, and they've got, literally hundreds of channels coming in, and they're busy enough mixing to 5.1, much less immersive, unless it were static. If they were able to do a static mix where not necessarily even object-based, it would have to more be channel-based, I think, but with objects floating around, that would just be prohibitively expensive in terms of man-hours, time.
I mean, live from Lincoln Center, maybe. The Super Bowl, that's a hard sell. And the expense that would add to the truck, and then down the line to the production people, the suits that the networks are going to say, how many more people am I going to get for that? How many more eyeballs or ears am I going to get for that? What's the ROI? And I just don't see it.
Right, right. Now, Mark 7 in the chat room is saying there are already broadcasts here in Europe with these capabilities, switching audio, video, and audio streams, for example, in Formula One races.
Yeah.
It may be that Europe is a bit ahead of us. As you said, there are a couple of 4K trucks in Australia. So,
and in Europe, because remember, in Europe, DVB and MPEG, MPEG-H and Fraunhofer are the home team. In the U.S., Dolby's the home team.
Yep, you're exactly right. Now, Web 1164 made an interesting comment that I've heard many times. I only have 2 ears. Now, that is the argument I've heard used for we shouldn't use more than 2 speakers in an audio system.
But your brain is a marvelous thing.
Exactly. And your brain can, even though you only have 2 ears, your brain can tell the direction from which sounds are coming. If you go out in the real world and you walk around your street, you'll hear a plane overhead and you'll know it's overhead. You'll hear a bird tweeting over there and you'll know that that's where it is, which is why immersive audio systems are so effective, in my opinion, because you have a bunch of speakers all around you. Okay, that's kind of a pain in the butt, but it reproduces the immersive quality of sound in the real world much more so than 2 speakers or even 5.1 or 7.1, in which the speakers are all in the same plane. So
you want the depth perception.
You want the depth perception, and you want the directionality.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay, well, we got a couple minutes left. I'd like to talk about a couple of sort of miscellaneous things, one of which was something you saw that was so cool. Gotta show.
Are you talking about what I think you're talking about?
I think so. The Porsche camera truck. It's not even a truck. It's a Porsche.
It's a Cayenne.
A Cayenne,
yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
It's a Porsche Cayenne SUV with a huge, must be 20 foot, it's called a Russian arm, camera arm on top of it. There you go. There's the front view. The thing on the top, that in the center, going out to the top, is a 20-foot camera arm. And
show us the other. Kirk, show us the other picture, the other Porsche picture. There
you go. And it just keeps going. And I said to the fellows who rent this out, why didn't you use, like anybody who's been around production, maybe you've seen a Chapman crane, which is on a huge truck platform, and this is on a bloody Cayenne. And I said, why? And I said, why the Cayenne? Do you get the stability and can it take the weight? And he said, Mike, we've taken that up to 120 miles an hour while shooting. And I said, are barf bags included in the rental price? and they've got a couple of these Cayennes. They've got some on like F-150s and whatnot because they want to go really, really fast. And he said, some of them are based, but here's the thing that makes sense. Some of them are based here in LA for the production community. And he said they've got 2 or 3 of those based out in Detroit. And I said, is Detroit now a big production community? He said, no, but they do a lot of car commercials. So a vehicle like that going 100 miles an hour with a driver, a boom or jib operator, a camera operator, and somebody to keep sanity is not outside the realm of possibility. I mean, I just saw that and I said, I got to take a picture of this one. And
there's also a camera in the front of the car as well. So there's 2 of them on this car.
But they said they can't do 2 at once because there's only 1 set of camera controls. So they've got a jib operator and a camera operator. They're 2 separate things. And I think he said it was like $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 a day for the vehicle dry. Bring your own cameras, bring your own driver, bring your own crew. But for capturing something like, what is it, Fast and Furious 7 or that type of movie, this is really cool. I nothing to do with 4K particularly, but I just thought people would.
It was just very cool. Yeah. Another thing that I saw, did you attend the Tech Summit on Cinema over the weekend before the show actually started?
No, I was at the press conferences that day. So
you were at all the press conferences, right? So I went to the Tech Summit, and there were a number of things there that were pretty interesting. They showed the Barco laser projector, which was really nice. They showed some new screen materials. And the one thing I wanted to sort of share with you, because I thought you'd get a kick out of it, is Barco actually showed a system called Escape, Barco Escape. And what it is basically is virtual reality communally shared. Now, virtual reality, usually, you put on a pair of goggles and it's a very isolating experience. But this is in a theater, and I've got a picture of it. Check this out. They put a screen on each side of the theater as well as in the front, and they project images onto all three of these screens as if you're sitting in the middle of the action. And they actually released a movie called Maze Runner, which was in 2014, and they redid about 10 minutes total of Maze Runner for this system. And I think there are 5 theaters that have it in the U.S. and 2 in Europe.
Cool.
Barco's based in Europe, so one of them at least is in Belgium. And you're sitting in the theater, and you can see stuff going by you on the sides, and it was kind of remarkable. I think in a way it might be kind of silly, but it's very interesting.
But it's like IMAX. It's not that silly. And there were guys again down in the lower part of the South Hall doing similar things with LED displays. I don't know if you could sit quite as close because the resolution is sort of requires a bit of distance. But why not?
Why not? And they were talking about it as something to bring people into the theater, because of course those of us with good home theaters, a lot of people who have those say, I haven't been out to the movies for 20 years or 15 years because I've got this great home theater. Why should I go out to the movies with a kid kicking the back of my chair and popcorn on the floor and people talking on their cell phone and stuff like that?
Yeah. I wouldn't go to that theater to see the newly remastered re-release of Citizen Kane, but if it's something shot for that, it makes sense. And it's funny, you reminded me of one other thing before we go, is there was a huge area in the show for drones. Drones were everywhere. The one thing I didn't see were production tools or cameras or other than just the typical helmet mount kind of things related to VR or even AR. That just didn't seem to be on the radar there.
Virtual reality and augmented reality is what you're referring to there. Augmented reality being like Google Glass, where you can see the world around you, but you also overlay things on top of it. Whereas virtual reality is completely isolating you from the real world, showing you only what they want you to see. And there were a number of sessions at the Tech Summit on Cinema over the weekend that were talking about virtual reality and how far that's come. And they're pretty convinced that that's going to be one way to go in terms of watching movies in the future. I myself am a little skeptical, primarily because it's such an isolating experience, right? You can't really look over at your partner or your friends or family or whatever and share the experience with them. You're totally isolated by these goggles.
I find it disorienting.
And there is a nausea-inducing factor as well, which you have to be very careful how you shoot things in order to avoid that. Like lots of camera pans and so on, you can make people sick, and they talked about that. And so it's a different paradigm. It's a different way of creating and producing movies. One of the guys mentioned that one way to overcome the isolation factor is they do it in video games now, where you all join the same game and you can see each other's avatars.
MMPRs.
MMPR, right? Massively multiplayer, whatever.
Game stuff.
Yeah. Game things. Yeah. See, I'm not a gamer, so I don't know any of this stuff. But yeah, exactly. But that would be one solution. But it seems to me that if you're going to do a VR movie, you're going to want the VR to be all around you so that you can really look up and look down and look right and left and see what the movie is showing you, not your friend or your partner sitting next to you. It's an interesting question, and I don't know the answer to it yet.
But the smell test, I mean, and it's funny that, you heard about it in the sessions, and that certainly gives it some viability. But the smell test that I apply is, okay, I want to produce a VR movie. Was there stuff on the floor in terms of cameras, mounts, things, production tools, plugins for the editing systems or editing software that let you work for this? And it may have been there and I missed it, but you certainly didn't notice it walking up and down the highly packed aisles. I think the attendance is going to be up around 100,000 this year.
Huh. Hey, Burke, our engineer, mentions in the chat room, one current theory is overlaying a fake nose in the VR to help overcome nausea.
So I have to wear a clown nose inside my Oculus?
Exactly.
No.
Exactly. That's hilarious.
Jiminy crickets.
Okay. Well, listen, we've come to the end of an hour of chatting about NAB, and there was so much there, and I'm greatly encouraged. The bottom line is I'm greatly encouraged for 4K or Ultra HD, particularly with high dynamic range displays now coming out. Cameras have the capability to capture it. There are some workflow editing tools that let you work with HDR. And so that to me is a huge leap, and I can't wait to see more of it, because every time I see it, I'm blown away.
Yeah, I fully agree. And, you know, and if not, you can go back there.
We can always go back to remember when. All right. Well, hey, thanks so much for being here. That's Mike Heiss, a jolly good CEDIA fellow, actually,
Indeed.
And all-around great guy around the industry. He writes for residential systems at resmagonline.com. That's a new URL, right? They changed their URL?
Actually, that's the old one. It's just shorter for the supers. And also Hidden Wires, which is hiddenwires.co.uk. And follow me on Twitter at Captain Vid.
Captain Vid, and that's CAPTNVID.
We were poor. I couldn't afford the I.
Or the A.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanst so much, Mike. Ahoy there, matey.
Scott. Thank you, chat room.
Hey, those of you who want to follow me online, of course, my online home is avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and at avsforum. You can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv/htg, and also on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Pete Putman, an industry consultant, very well known and highly regarded industry consultant. And we're going to be talking about HDMI and other connection formats. Because now that we have UHD coming, we need more bandwidth. Where are we going to get it? It's got to be in the connection somewhere. Pete is an expert in this topic, and so he will be bringing us all kinds of very deep knowledge about connections. So hope you will join me for that. Until then, geek out.